Друзья дорогие, всех вас приветствую.
I want to recommend everyone a documentary that was filmed by two independent Ukrainian journalists. The only journalists who remained in the city after Russian forces had begun their siege. This film was released abroad and in America, so you will hear English voices and an English dub over the recordings of the film. So we have added Russian subtitles just for your ability to understand. I want to say a few words before you watch this film. First of all, I think Ukrainians have no need to watch this film. You have seen this happen with your own eyes. You continue living this reality day after day. So I think this movie should be seen all over the world, but first and foremost in Russia. Because the vast majority of the population of Russia, unfortunately, is in a state of deep sleep. I think that because of the huge area that Russia covers, and because all the time that Putin was in power, people were taught not to participate.
Называет «Была бы ваша жизнь лучше?»
Связываю свою жизнь со спецоперацией, лучше или хуже. Моя жизнь зависит только от меня.
У меня негативные цены повысились, отдыхать в этом году не поехала.
And told not to be involved in government affairs, but to only pay attention to their own private affairs, and promised the status quo. If you don't interfere with anything the state does, then the state won't be touching you. That was the status quo. The status quo was destroyed by there being a general mobilization. And the purpose of the film in the first place, I think, is to help people who don't understand yet, people who are still doubting and wavering about who to support in this situation. I'm surprised, but they do exist, even after almost 2 years of this aggressive, destructive war in Ukraine. Russia's war against Ukraine. And after we posted this in our Telegram channel, we got a comment from a woman saying, "What is the point of watching this film as a Russian if we can't even change anything? Isn't it better to stay unaware of things? Because our power as citizens won't increase in any case." The thing is, this war would not have been possible without the support of the majority of the population. Because let's recall how this first started. What led to the current war is that Putin sent our standing army to Ukraine, hoping to capture the country within a week. This was about 120 or 130,000 of our regular troops. Basically, every one of those soldiers were destroyed in combat. Think about why the government declared a draft. This is something that they delayed until the very last moment. They knew the moment that they announced that they were drafting people to go to war, their approval rating would fall immediately. And they were afraid of that. After the wiping out of our standing military in Ukraine, the state mobilized about 300,000 or 350,000 plus troops. And this is actually a huge amount, because when we talk about the losses and casualties of this draft, we need to multiply that initial number of 300 to 350,000 by 3 at least. Remember their father, their mother, their children, their wives. These people were just deceived. They are victims because practically all of the mobilized were scammed into joining the army. They were told to come to the military recruitment base, but not to be recruited, just to make sure that the government had their documents in order. When they came, then they would just be stuffed into some unmarked cars and carried off to the front lines like that. They would be told, oh, we are mobilizing you, but don't worry, you'll be here in your country defending some storehouses of weapons. It wasn't true. It was a lie, as usual. People who had no relation to the military, people who had no military training, were thrown right onto the front lines under enemy artillery fire. These people had chronic illnesses. They had really skinny frames. They were simply not fit to fight in any military, and yet they were just unceremoniously dumped onto the front lines. For my state, for my country, its population is nothing more than another thing, another resource for them to burn through. And the government thinks that resource is unlimited because of how huge our country is. So there's no need to think too deeply about it. You just gather up 350,000 in order to plug the holes of the front lines. And the government no longer talks about conquering or taking over something. They just get a bunch of people in order to cover for their own logistical failures. And after this, things that the human mind can't even fathom start to begin to happen. The government, our state, has become so haughty, it's audacious enough to actually say openly, without even hiding it, hey, Mr. Mobilized, our comrades there on the front lines, nobody is going to let you return home. Until the end of the special military operation, you're going to be fighting there. This means that out of 350,000 people, 0 will return home. If they do return home, it will be in a plastic bag or without any limbs. A light injury is not enough for the government to deem someone worthy of returning home. I often get the question, but what can we do? We can't influence anything, you know? How can we stop this? My beloved friends, I know very well that to openly protest in Russia right now is to voluntarily become a martyr. And if you were martyring yourself, then that would be one thing. But to call martyrdom upon yourself and your close family members is a completely another thing. And that's what it means to stage a protest in Russia now. The church fathers forbid one from demanding that another person become a saint. We can only hold ourselves to that standard. So I have never called for anyone living in Russia and for anyone living in a dictatorial regime in a dictator-led country to openly stage a. But please imagine what would happen. Imagine if in the first days of the full-scale war, people knew what the government was preparing. Mothers wouldn't have let go of their sons. Wives wouldn't have let their husbands go to the front line. And if the mobilized knew what was waiting for them, either a plastic bag or a wheelchair in a country where there's no wheelchair ramps, then the war would have ended within days because no one would have gone there. Because you can't force a person to fight when they know what you're preparing for them. And even if each drafted soldier was to be forcefully snatched and sent to the front line, what's next? There, would they be given a shotgun? Because what commander of any company or regiment is going to give automatic rifles or any weaponry to 100 or more men that just hate them? Prigozhin's example showed what could happen. He basically made it to Moscow without anyone saying a word. It's just that he didn't take the matter to the end. Otherwise, we would see what kind of fun we would be having in Russia now. And that's why I want all of my fellow Russians to wake up. And if we were all awake, then all of this brutality, all of this garbage, all of this nonsense and horror, this nightmare would come to an end. But out of my two main reasons for wanting Russians to see this film in the first place is First of all, empathy towards the Ukrainians. Because when you're being killed, when you're being raped, when people are just doing unspeakable things to you, then you want others around you to pay attention to your predicament, to know what you're going through. And nothing will increase your grief more than others' indifference. Nothing will increase your grief more than hearing people who know what's going on say, wait, I don't want to see that. Why should I find out about what's happening to you? Sorry, I'm not interested. I just have empathy towards Ukrainians, and I want Russians to feel the same way. Second of all, I love my country, and I want the best for it. In my understanding of Christian love is that you not just love your neighbor by wishing them material prosperity, but also seek their spiritual salvation. So, most importantly, my country, my state of the Russian Federation is committing terrible crimes in the neighboring country, Ukraine. And all of us Russians bear responsibility for these actions. Collective responsibility is not the same as collective guilt. Those are two different concepts. However, we do bear responsibility. Every Russian, from the time they start to be able to reason, to the time that their brains are still working, though they are a very old citizen of Russia, they are responsible for what their government is inflicting upon the rest of the world. But the guilt is upon those who are ordering these crimes to be committed and those who are actually executing them, and also upon those who are ignoring what's happening in the country, those who just want to calmly sit through this whole thing in Russia and not see what Russia itself is doing, and are just saying, hey, I don't want to see this, turn off the screen because I have nothing to do with this. Of course, there are different degrees of guilt.
The guilt for this is first and foremost upon those who ordered for these unlawful acts to be done. The second order of guilt is for those who actually executed these criminal orders. Another degree of guilt, a lesser one, but still a degree of guilt, are those who just passively accepted everything that was going on and decided that they would just sit through it without doing anything. The person that simply agrees with what's going on or supports it or decides that they're going to pretend they don't notice what's going on is going to be on trial, same as the people who launched the rockets towards Ukrainian cities.
On the day of final judgment, you will be forced to answer and be held to account. Watch this film attentively. Watch it carefully. Mariupol is a Russian-speaking city. If you watch the movie, you'll realize every single person in Mariupol was speaking Russian. Not a stone upon stone was left in Mariupol. 25,000 corpses, only among the civilian population. Is this liberation? If so, who did we liberate Mariupol from? How did we even liberate this city? Did we protect any Russians in Ukraine? We destroyed the city, together with its population, which was entirely Russian-speaking.
We turned a city into a mass grave.
And this, I want you to understand, my friends, is not a historical documentary. This is documenting what is happening right now. This is something that is still relevant because Russia continues to do it. And I pray that this war ends as soon as possible, but I only see one way out, that Russians wake up and become aware of what they're doing.
I'll say it again, when we wake up as Russians, all of us, this will come to an end, because once we've realized what kind of crime this is, the scale of the atrocious, monstrous things that are going on, none of us will consciously want to participate in it. Well, that's it basically. I had planned originally to say just a few words, but it's morphed into something much longer, even though the film basically speaks for itself. The person who remains unmoved by this movie, the person who doesn't understand the truth after seeing these scenes, what has been documented in this movie. Those who will say that it's all faked and that this is just really good acting, well, they have kind of crossed the line there, and it's very difficult to help a person like that. Only God can help by sending them sorrows, great grief and sorrows that may wake them up to other human suffering. But I will continue to pray for God to send all of us an awakening, and that He will illuminate and enlighten many hearts, and that He will keep us steadfast standing in His commandments. And I hope that everyone can choose a side. Choose who do you want to stand beside on the day of the final judgment.
С Богом.